I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord. In these uncertain times, when fear abounds, fear of a pandemic, fear of crashing stock markets, fear of a changing climate, where are we to turn? Where can we find peace in our hearts? The psalmist is very clear. We find our help in the Lord, the creator of everything, who will also keep us safe. Safe. That's an interesting word. Perhaps we think that means that since God is protecting us, nothing bad will ever happen to us. I think all of us can attest that that is not so. I'm sure that everyone in this room has experienced something that has caused you deep pain. Well, so what does it mean to be in relationship with the Lord who will keep us safe? I think the answers may be found in our gospel reading for today. We've moved back into the Gospel of John. This fourth gospel was written by a Jewish mystic who we know as John. According to John, Jesus was teaching a new way of being human. And Jesus teaches this in very unexpected ways. The first two chapters of John set the stage for Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus. First, John makes it clear that Jesus is the incarnation of the Logos, the Word, the Christ, who was present with God in the beginning. And this gospel is the story of Jesus as human, as incarnate. So John moves on to tell about Jesus being baptized and calling his first disciples. Chapter 2 opens with the story of the wedding at Cana. And Jesus changes water into fine wine, gallons and gallons of fine wine. Then Jesus makes the long trip from Capernaum to Jerusalem. And it is a long trip. By bus, it took us about 2 hours. Think about being on foot. Jesus went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. He walked into the temple and was horrified to see the money changers and the sellers of animals who were cheating the pilgrims. So Jesus drove them all out of the temple and created a scene, a big scene. And then we come to today's story. Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He's a religious leader among the Jewish people. He comes to Jesus in the dark. Now, that's not really surprising because he was probably present on the Temple Mount as Jesus made his big scene of throwing out the merchants. No doubt, Nicodemus did not want anyone to see him talking to this unknown rabbi from the north. But obviously, something that Jesus had said or done made Nicodemus curious. He wanted to know more. He was a sincere seeker. Note that Nicodemus does not ask a question. He merely lets Jesus know that he recognizes Jesus as a man of God. Jesus' response is very curious. He answers an unasked question. And the response completely buffaloes Nicodemus. Jesus says, "No one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above." Nicodemus, and I can see him shaking his head at this unexpected comment, hears it literally. And he says to Jesus, "What are you talking about? I'm old. I can't go back inside my mother's womb and be born again." Nicodemus, though he didn't say it, probably thought Jesus was a little bit crazy. Jesus, and I see Jesus shaking his head too, responds, "No, Nicodemus, I'm not talking about a literal birth. I'm talking about being born of water and the Spirit. I'm talking about a spiritual birth." Poor old Nicodemus. He's still confused. So Jesus continues teaching him. Jesus tells Nicodemus that in order to understand, he's got to enter into a transformative experience and open himself to a new mystical way of relating to the holy. Being born. Of course, my mind went back to the births of my two children. Childbirth is an interesting and powerful metaphor of the spiritual life. As I think of my experience of childbirth, I think of the pain and the messiness, followed by amazement and wonder and joy and hope. Though I was very fortunate in my labor, the work of birthing, it's labor. My labor was pretty short, only about 5 hours, but the pain was real. Powerful contractions, ripping skin, finally one powerful push, and this tiny human being appeared. And all that pain was replaced by awe and wonder. How could this tiny human being come from me? A new baby is the epitome of a new beginning. So is being born of the Spirit like that? It is, I think, but it's not a one-and-done experience. The labor of being born of the Spirit, the spiritual journey, is an ongoing series of births. Multiple experiences of ripping pain and rushes of joy and hope. Multiple experiences of pushing and groaning and wondering when it's going to end, followed by incredible joy. Jesus identifies the Spirit with the mystery of the wind that blows where it will, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it's going. To be born of the Spirit is this same kind of mysterious, mystical experience. The good news is that every time we go through the birth pangs, we are assured that the unchanging love of God is with us. And it's this love that makes us feel safe enough to work through the birthing, to process into new ways of seeing and living. In the midst of each birth of the Spirit, in the middle of each challenge we face, there is a deepening and a feeling of being more in touch with ourselves and with God. Sometimes we might get frustrated in this process. I remember for a lot of my life praying for patience. And then Jack got sick. And then I fussed at God. Because many times during the course of being a caregiver, I wanted to say, okay, God, I got this. I got the patience deal. You don't have to keep giving me experiences. It reminds me of Rilke's line, I live my life in widening circles. Every process of spiritual birth widens this circle and yet draws us closer to God. We don't enter the world as adults, which is a good thing. And just as we don't enter the world as adults, we don't start our faith fully formed. We seek to grow up and grow deep, and every experience has the potential to enhance our growth. The process of birth is intimate work. A lot of it happens in the dark, both literally and figuratively. It's appropriate then that Nicodemus comes in the dark, where we can more easily speak of what is intimate and eternal, a new way of thinking and being. It's interesting that John does not tell us Nicodemus's decision, at least not in this story. Later in the book, we hear from Nicodemus twice. After Jesus is arrested, Nicodemus advocates for him to have a hearing, due process under the law. And after the crucifixion, Nicodemus is with Joseph of Arimathea to claim Jesus' body and anoint him before burial. Nicodemus must have eventually heard the message of Jesus. Marjorie Burke, who is a co-editor of one of my favorite books, Women's Uncommon Prayers, talks about the new birth beautifully in this poem. Human birth, pain, messy, sticky, sweaty. Push, breathe. Push, breathe. No pain, no gain. Push, breathe. Push, breathe. Finally, new life. Spiritual birth, what does this mean? Pain, struggle, water, sweat. No pain, no gain. Trust in God. I push against my own will. God breathes new life into me. Push, breathe. Push, breathe. Wind and water. No, I don't want to go. The wind blows. God's breath surrounds me. I resist. Push, breathe. Push, breathe. The water of baptism engulfs me. I am made new. Human birth, spiritual birth. I don't remember the first. I don't remember the second either. It happened gradually. A long litany of push, breathe. Push, breathe. Not willing to fully give myself over to God. The more we are willing to give ourselves fully to God, to allow ourselves to sink into God's love, the safer we will feel. As we allow each birth to bring us into that holy place where the Spirit resides and shares her wisdom, we will be awakened to the sacred in every moment. In the words of retired Bishop John Shelby Spong, if God is the source of life, let us worship God by living. If God is the source of love, let us worship God by loving. If God is the ground of being, let us worship God by having the courage to be more fully human, the embodiment of the divine. Push, breathe. Push, breathe.